The storm came without warning. Varkis could feel it in the deep tremor of the ground, the way the air grew charged and strange, like a living thing holding its breath. Lightning tore across the sky, casting the jagged peaks of Zathar Ridge in pale white fire. He kept his claws low to the stone as he crept forward, eyes scanning the horizon. The hunt had been good tonight, but the night had turned violent. Wild storms meant predators would stalk these cliffs. Then, he heard it. A sound no creature of Varkis's world should ever make. It was thin, broken, and full of pain, a cry that cut through the wind and the thunder. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a cub separated from its pack. But then came a second sound, words, garbled and strange, but clearly words. His spine stiffened. He gestured for the others to hold position. The hunt party crouched behind him, their amber eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Varkis moved toward the sound alone, the rain slicking his black scales to a reflective sheen. And then he saw it. A small figure half buried in mud and shattered metal. A strange craft lay torn open across the rocks, no Zathari ship, no known design. Smoke hissed from it in the rain, and near its crumpled edge was the child. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, soft-skinned, fragile-looking, with strands of hair plastered to her small face. Her limbs were shaking, lips moving with quiet, desperate sounds that meant nothing to him but carried an emotion he recognized, terror. Varkis's instincts warred within him. They were forbidden to interfere with off-worlders. The Council of Clans would have him stripped of rank if he brought an outsider into their care. Yet leaving her here, on this night, on this ridge, was a death sentence. Another flash of lightning struck close enough to blind him. When his vision cleared, he made his decision. He lifted her gently, his talons careful not to pierce her soft skin. The child whimpered but did not resist. Varkis, hissed Kren, his second in command, as he returned to the hunt party. What is that? It is no spawn of our world. It is a child, Varkis growled. We do not leave children to die. The others exchanged uneasy glances but said no more. Varkis wrapped his own cloak around the small figure, shielding her from the storm. Then, with the hunt forgotten, they turned back toward the caverns of Zathar Ridge. The next hours were a blur of firelight and hushed voices. The healers examined the strange child with cautious hands. She was malnourished, bruised, but breathing. Whatever metal vessel had carried her here was beyond saving, its core shattered, its design alien. When she finally awoke, the entire chamber fell silent. Her wide, human eyes reflected the glow of the hearth. She looked so impossibly small among them, the towering Zathari with their gleaming scales and bone crests. She tried to speak again. The words meant nothing, but her tone was pleading. She is frightened, one of the healers said. Then she will stay, Varkis declared. Until she is well enough to speak for herself. Kren's crest flared. You cannot be serious. If the council finds out. Let them find out, Varkis snarled, his tail slamming against the stone. I will not explain to them why we let a child die in the dark. And so, the decision was made. The days turned into weeks, and the strange child grew stronger. She followed Varkis constantly, like a hatchling imprinted on its parent. She learned their food, their tools, their gestures. The others began to soften, despite themselves. When she laughed for the first time, a sound like silver bells echoing in the cavern halls, even Kren's stern expression cracked. Varkis was not a creature given to sentiment, but something about her stirred a fierce protectiveness in him. She trusted him completely, falling asleep beside the fire with her tiny hand clutching the edge of his cloak. By the time the first council messenger arrived, the child had become one of them. The council envoy was furious. You violated every code of isolation, he roared, his ceremonial crest glittering in the firelight. Do you realize what you have done, Varkis? This creature could bring death upon us all if its kin arrive seeking vengeance. She is a child, Varkis replied, standing tall. There will be no vengeance for an act of mercy. The envoy's tail lashed. Then you will bear the burden of your decision. If her kind comes, if they bring war, you will answer for it with your life. Varkis did not flinch. So be it. The child, who by now had learned to say her name, Lena, watched the entire exchange with wide, confused eyes. She did not know it yet, but that night the Zathari had bound themselves to her fate. The storm that had brought Lena had passed, but the real storm had only just begun. Far beyond Zathar Ridge, far beyond the night sky, human search ships scoured the sector. The loss of a single child might not have moved a government, but this was no ordinary child. She was the daughter of a high-ranking officer in the Terran Defense Fleet. And when humanity finally found her, they would find Varkis's people too. And everything would change. The sky caught fire 3 weeks later. The Zathari watched from the cliffs as burning streaks split the night, a storm of light descending through the clouds. The sound came seconds later, a rolling thunder unlike any natural storm. Ships. Varkis's spines bristled as he stood with Lena perched on a ledge beside him, her small hand gripping his claw. She tilted her head back, eyes widening at the sight. For her, this firestorm was salvation. For him, it was the promise of upheaval. They are coming, Kren murmured beside him, his voice grim. Yes, Varkis replied. His throat rumbled with something he could not name. And they will not come gently. By dawn, the first human ships landed. The Zathari had never seen craft like these, massive, angular vessels that descended on pillars of blue fire. The ground shook as they touched down in the valley below. From their bellies spilled armored figures, their visors glowing in the morning mist. Lena's cry of joy was the first sound to cut through the tense silence. She pulled against Varkis's arm, desperate to run to them. Wait, he said softly, holding her back. But she would not wait. She broke free, her bare feet slapping against the wet stone as she sprinted toward the valley. Varkis swore and leapt after her, Kren and 2 others close behind. The human soldiers saw her coming and immediately fanned into defensive formation. Weapons came up, sleek black rifles humming with lethal energy. Varkis placed himself between them and the child before a single shot could be fired, his cloak spreading like the wings of a dark beast. His warriors flanked him, claws ready. Hold, a voice boomed over the soldiers' comms. A figure stepped forward, a human in a different kind of armor, marked with a gold insignia on the chest plate. When the helmet came off, Varkis saw a face aged by years of war, eyes like flint, and yet those eyes softened the instant they fell on the child. Lena, the man called. The little girl froze for an instant, then ran into his arms. The commander dropped to his knees, clutching her so tightly she squeaked in protest. His shoulders shook with something like a sob. Then he looked up, at Varkis. You have something to say, Varkis growled. The man stood, still holding the child. I am Admiral Rafe Calder, Terran Defense Fleet. And you, his gaze swept over the towering Zathari warriors. You are the ones who kept my daughter alive. Varkis gave a single nod. She was found during the storm. We gave her shelter. And you didn't harm her? Rafe's voice carried suspicion, not hostility, but the hard edge of a soldier who had seen too much. She stands before you whole, Varkis said flatly. Does that answer your question? The admiral's lips thinned, but he inclined his head. It does. For that, you have my gratitude. The air around them was still tense. The human soldiers had lowered their weapons, but they had not left. The Zathari warriors were still bristling, ready for an attack that had not come. Then Lena, as if sensing the weight between them, wriggled free from her father's arms. She ran back to Varkis and clutched his leg. This one, she said, her voice halting but clear. Safe. The single word struck Rafe like a blow. His expression shifted, some of the suspicion melting away. He stepped closer until he stood nearly face to face with Varkis. "You have my daughter's trust," he said quietly. "That means you have mine." That night, the valley became a strange meeting place. The Zathri lit their great fire pits, and the humans pitched their shining field lights, bathing the camp in twin glows. There were talks, long, tense talks. The humans wanted to take Lena home immediately. The Zathri wanted assurances that their world would not be invaded or stripped of resources as the price of her return. Varkis watched Lena as she played near the fire, laughing with two of the younger Zathri. She no longer seemed a child caught between two worlds, she was simply Lena, belonging to both. "She will not forget us," Varkis said when the Admiral approached. "No," Rafe admitted, his gaze following his daughter. "I don't think she ever could." "You fear us," Varkis said. "I fear what I don't understand," Rafe replied. "But I also know what it means to owe a debt. You saved her when you had no reason to. That matters." Varkis inclined his head slightly. "Then hear this, if any ever come to harm this child, they will answer to me before they answer to you." The Admiral's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Careful. That sounds like a threat." "It is a promise," Varkis said simply. The next day, Lena left with her father. She cried as she was carried aboard the shuttle, her small hand reaching back toward Varkis until the last moment. When the ship vanished into the clouds, the valley seemed unbearably empty. Kren stood beside him in silence. "You did well," Kren said at last. "She lives because of you." Varkis said nothing. But deep in his chest, a strange certainty was forming. Something told him this was not the end of their bond. It was only the beginning. Because humans were not a people who forgot debts. And one day, that promise would be repaid, in ways that would shake the stars. The first attack came at dawn. Varkis awoke to the sound of war, not the distant thunder of storms, but the shriek of plasma fire tearing across the cliffs. The cavern walls shook. Dust rained down. He was on his feet in an instant, spear in hand. "Kren," he barked. The second in command came running. "Raiders, off-world." They broke through the ridge pass. The Zathri had many enemies, scavenger bands, rival clans, even syndicate slavers who came from beyond the stars to hunt living beings. But never had they dared strike at Zathar Ridge directly. Until now. Varkis snarled, his crest flaring with fury. "Sound the horns. Wake every warrior. We hold them until every hatchling is deep in the tunnels." The war horns roared through the caverns, a sound older than memory. Warriors armed themselves in a flurry of motion. By the time Varkis reached the ridge, the sky was burning, a half-dozen raider ships hung above, firing down on their dwellings. The Zathri fought back with everything they had. Bolts of plasma seared the air, claws and spears struck home. But the raiders were relentless, armored and well-armed. For every one that fell, two more seemed to appear. By midday, Varkis knew the truth, they would not hold the ridge much longer. And then the sky split open. The human fleet arrived without warning. It began as a deep rumble that rolled across the sky, followed by a light so bright it turned night into day. Then they came, massive warships, each one a leviathan of metal and fire, descending through the clouds like gods of war. The raiders hesitated. For one brief, terrible moment, the entire battlefield froze. Then the humans opened fire. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Spear-thin beams of light lanced out from orbit, severing the raiders' ships midair. Drop shuttles screamed down, deploying soldiers in gleaming armor. Within minutes, the enemy force was shattered, those who could flee did, their engines trailing smoke. Those who could not were burned to ash. The Zathri had seen war before. They had never seen anything like this. When the last shot faded, the valley was silent except for the hiss of cooling metal. A single shuttle descended onto the blood-soaked ridge. From its ramp stepped Admiral Rafe Calder, and at his side, clutching his hand, was Lena. She was taller now, no longer the fragile child Varkis had first found in the storm. But when she saw him standing there, battered and blood-stained, she broke away from her father and ran to him. "Varkis," she cried, throwing her arms around his leg. Varkis, who had faced death without flinching, found himself kneeling. His great claws hovered for a moment, then gently rested on her shoulders. "You came back," he rumbled. "Of course I did," she said, smiling through tears. Rafe approached, his soldiers fanning out to secure the area. "You didn't call for help," he said, scanning the wreckage of battle. "I had no time," Varkis replied. "We would have fallen before your ships could even reach orbit." Rafe nodded slowly. "We didn't come because you called. We came because Lena asked us to." Varkis's head tilted, confused. "She heard what happened," Rafe said. "News reached us through traders 2 days ago. She came to me and said, 'We can't let them die.' She wouldn't stop until I agreed to mobilize the fleet." Varkis's gaze shifted to Lena. She met his eyes with fierce determination far too old for her small frame. "You once promised no harm would come to me," she said softly. "Now I promise the same to you." The following days were unlike anything the Zathari had ever known. Human engineers and medics worked side by side with their people, patching the wounded, rebuilding shattered dwellings, reinforcing defenses. Where once there had been suspicion, there was now something else: respect. Rafe called a meeting on the final day, with the elders of every Zathari clan present. "We owe you a debt," the admiral said simply. "Not just for my daughter's life, but for the bond she forged here. Humanity remembers its friends. And humanity defends them." He placed a small metallic device in the center of the council chamber. "This is a Terran defense beacon," he explained. "If ever you are threatened again, activate it. No matter where our fleets are, no matter what war we fight, we will come." The elders murmured, tails lashing with disbelief. "You would do this," one finally asked, "for a people not your own?" Rafe's expression softened. "For the people who saved my daughter? For the people she calls family? Yes." When the humans finally departed, the ridge was quiet again, but different. The Zathari no longer felt like an isolated, forgotten people. They had seen what humanity could unleash when roused, and now that terrible power stood guard over them. Varkis stood with Lena as the last shuttle lifted off. "You will leave again," he said. "Yes," Lena said, her small hand finding his. "But I will come back. You're part of my story now. And humans never forget the ones who save them." Varkis looked toward the horizon, where the sun broke through the clouds. For the first time in many cycles, he felt something like peace. The storm that had begun with a single lost child had ended with a bond between species, one forged in fire and war, and strong enough to guard the stars themselves.